Ethan Miller pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the airplane window, staring down at the sprawling city of Denver below. It looked peaceful from this height, tiny specks of cars weaving through streets, morning sunlight reflecting off skyscrapers, the distant Rocky Mountains rising like silent guardians. He could almost imagine himself as a bird, cutting through the sky with absolute freedom. For 14 years, Ethan had been captivated by airplanes. It wasn't just a hobby. It was a connection to the father he had lost when he was 8. His father had been a private pilot, a man whose stories of aerial maneuvers and narrow escapes from storms had always left Ethan wide-eyed with wonder. Today, Ethan was traveling with his mother, Claire, for a brief family trip to Seattle. His excitement was tangible, bouncing like electricity under his skin. He had packed a small notebook filled with aviation diagrams, charts, and scribbles on aerodynamics. Hidden in his backpack was a worn aviation radio, a relic from his father that Ethan had painstakingly restored over months. While other kids his age were engrossed in video games or social media, Ethan's world revolved around engines, lift, thrust, and air traffic control frequencies. "Mom, look, you can see the mountains from here," Ethan exclaimed, pointing at the distant peaks. Claire smiled, ruffling his hair. Her eyes betrayed a hint of worry. She always had that nervous edge when he got lost in his aviation obsessions, but she had learned to let him breathe, knowing it calmed him. "You're always thinking about planes," she said gently, "but at least you're happy." Ethan grinned. "Planes are happiness, they are freedom." The plane's engines hummed steadily, a comforting low thrum that vibrated through the seats. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced grace, offering coffee and orange juice, checking seatbelts, and delivering that familiar pre-flight reassurance. Parents hushed children, some passengers flipped open books, and a few stared blankly at their screens, oblivious to the world outside. But for Ethan, this flight was no ordinary commute. It was a living classroom. Every gauge, every flicker of the instrument panel, every whir of the turbines fascinated him. He leaned closer to the seatback monitor, reading the flight path: Denver to Seattle, roughly 2 hours, mostly over the Cascade Range. Ethan traced the path with his finger, imagining the plane cutting through clouds, gliding silently above the treetops. He whispered to himself the names of the peaks, rivers, and towns below. In that moment, he felt an almost magical connection to the sky, a connection he had inherited from his father, though he had never known it could be so real. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began to relax. Ethan peeked into the overhead bins, checking the luggage and listening to the faint, rhythmic clatter of wheels and locks. Every sound had a story. Every vibration hinted at the complex ballet happening inside the fuselage. He imagined the pilots up front, their eyes scanning instruments, hands adjusting controls with precision. He had watched hours of cockpit footage online, memorized emergency protocols, and even practiced speaking in a crisp, professional tone as if he were relaying commands himself. His knowledge wasn't just theoretical, it was instinctual. "Ethan, don't get lost in the clouds too much," Claire said, nudging him gently. He laughed. "I'm not lost, Mom, I'm observing." Minutes passed and the plane settled into a smooth climb. The city shrank further into the distance, the roads turning into thin ribbons of gray. Ethan could see patches of farmland, scattered towns, and the first hints of dense forests as the plane ascended toward 9,000 meters. The sunlight poured through the windows, casting golden streaks on the cabin walls, glinting off the polished metal of the seats. It was beautiful, serene, perfectly ordinary. Yet Ethan's mind remained alert. He kept one hand on his aviation radio, fiddling with knobs and switches, even as he listened to the faint static of civilian air traffic control channels. Sometimes he'd catch fragments of pilots' conversations, routine check-ins, landing clearances, minor turbulence warnings. He scribbled notes in his notebook, jotting down call signs, altitudes, and flight paths. One day, he thought, I'll be up there making decisions like that. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Ethan leaned back, closing his eyes briefly, imagining the vast expanse of sky stretching endlessly above him. He felt a thrill that was equal parts excitement and reverence. Flying wasn't just a hobby, it was a calling, a legacy. Suddenly, a soft rumble passed through the plane. At first, Ethan thought it was just normal turbulence, a minor jiggle in the airframe. But the rumble grew stronger, a low, persistent vibration that made his stomach tighten. He opened his eyes, scanning the cabin. Passengers murmured nervously, glancing around. The flight attendants exchanged quick, concerned looks. Even Claire's hand tightened on his arm, her earlier calm replaced with an edge of unease. Ethan's instincts kicked in. He reached for the radio, listening intently. The engine still hummed, but there was something off. A subtle irregularity, a faint stutter in the otherwise steady drone. He frowned, leaning closer to the window, peering at the distant horizon. His pulse quickened, not with fear, but anticipation. Something in his gut told him this flight was about to become extraordinary, though he had no idea how extraordinary. The captain's voice suddenly came over the intercom, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing minor technical difficulties. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Ethan's ears perked up. Minor technical difficulties. He had read hundreds of pilot manuals, studied countless flight emergency protocols. Minor rarely meant minor. He shifted forward, gripping the armrest, scanning every instrument he could see, imagining what the cockpit must look like. Outside, the clouds seemed innocuous, fluffy and white, stretching endlessly. But Ethan knew the sky could change in an instant, from serene to merciless. He adjusted the dials on his radio, hopping to catch more signals, more clues about what was happening up front. He whispered quietly to himself, "Engines check, altitude check, stability check." His mind raced, cataloging every detail, every sound. Claire watched him nervously. "Ethan, maybe don't worry so much," she said softly, but Ethan barely heard her. He had become attuned to the hum of the aircraft, the slight vibration through the fuselage, the subtle cues that something wasn't right. Minutes ticked by and the plane continued its climb, engines steady yet strangely quiet in their rhythm. Ethan leaned back, taking a deep breath. He glanced around, noticing small details. A toddler asleep in a parent's lap, a businessman typing furiously on a laptop, the hum of air circulation, the faint scent of coffee lingering in the cabin. All ordinary, all perfectly mundane. And yet beneath it all, a tension hummed, almost imperceptible, like the quiet before a storm. Ethan pressed his forehead to the glass again, staring at the endless blue. Somewhere out there, above the clouds, the world seemed infinite and serene. But he knew the skies could be deceptive. Pilots, he remembered, always respected the sky, but they also feared it. And Ethan, in his 14-year-old intuition, understood that today, something unusual was waiting for him and the passengers on this flight. He didn't yet know the true scale of what was about to happen. He didn't yet know that at 9,000 meters, the engines would die, and that the fate of everyone aboard would hinge on his knowledge, his courage, and the call sign his father had once used in the skis. For now, all that existed was the serene climb, the hum of the engines, and the boy whose fascination with flight would soon become a story that no one would forget. The climb had been steady, almost serene, and for a brief moment Ethan allowed himself to relax. He had watched the city shrink below, imagined the snow-capped peaks of the Rockies, and traced the flight path toward Seattle with quiet fascination. But as the plane reached 9,000 meters, the ordinary hum of the engines shifted. It began as a soft stutter, barely perceptible at first. Ethan noticed it immediately, a fraction of a second of irregularity in the drone of the turbines. Most passengers were too engrossed in reading, napping, or scrolling on their phones to notice. But Ethan's instincts, honed through countless hours of studying engines and flight logs, recognized it instantly. His pulse quickened, and he leaned closer to the window, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of turbulence. The sky looked calm, but he had learned that appearances could be deceiving. Then came the first real alarm, a sharp, piercing chime from the cockpit. It wasn't the soothing seatbelt bell or the routine alert. This was urgent. Red lights blinked on panels throughout the cabin. The plane shuddered violently, sending a ripple of fear through passengers. Drinks tipped in their cups, and a few phones skidded across tray tables. The flight attendants braced against seats, their calm professionalism faltering for just a moment as the aircraft rocked. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," Captain Rodriguez's voice boomed over the intercom. "We are experiencing technical difficulties. Ensure your seatbelts are fastened." Ethan felt his stomach drop as the realization hit. He had read countless stories of engine failures, but seeing it happen in real time was different. The hum of the engines faded. Then, silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence at cruising altitude, the terrifying, unnatural silence of turbines gone dead. The plane trembled as it lost the thrust that had been keeping it aloft. Gravity began to assert itself mercilessly, pulling the aircraft down with a force that made every passenger press instinctively into their seats. "Engine 1, Engine 2, both," Ethan whispered, gripping his notebook tightly. He could hear the faint muttering of nearby passengers, some questioning each other, some silent in disbelief. The cabin air became tense, electric, every breath shallow. He could see the subtle panic in Claire's eyes as she gripped the armrest. The stewardess near him whispered reassurances, but even her voice trembled. Captain Rodriguez and his co-pilot sprang into action. The cockpit doors swung open briefly, and the assistants glimpsed the faces of the pilots, pale and focused. Beads of sweat ran down Captain Rodriguez's forehead as he flipped switches, toggled emergency protocols, and attempted to restart the engines. The first attempt was met with silence, only the faint vibration of the aircraft. The second attempt produced a cough, then nothing. The engines refused to respond. "Mayday, Mayday. Denver Center, this is Flight 482, engines out, descending rapidly. Request immediate assistance," the captain shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. Static crackled over the radio. The transmission was weak, distorted, broken. Air traffic control's response was either delayed or missing entirely. Panic deepened. The passengers began murmuring loudly, some clutching seats, others crying softly. Ethan stayed silent, observing, calculating. He had imagined emergencies before, had watched simulation videos over and over, but now it was all real. The plane, a massive machine once so reliable, had become a glider, subject only to gravity and the skill of the crew. Ethan's mind raced. He recalled his father's stories of lost radio connections, of pilots improvising under impossible circumstances. He adjusted the small knobs on his aviation radio, listening intently to static and faint signals. He could hear bits of communication, but most were garbled. The engines were silent, the plane's systems partially functioning, and every passenger could feel the tension rising. The aircraft shuddered again as it lost altitude faster than expected. Seats pressed against passengers with a force that made breathing slightly more difficult. A mother clutched her child. A businessman whispered a quick prayer under his breath. The flight attendants attempted to calm the crowd, walking down the aisles, offering soft words, but fear had already taken hold. Ethan's gaze moved to the cockpit door. He could see the pilots working frantically, hands moving over panels, eyes scanning instruments that now seemed almost alien. Captain Rodriguez was sweating profusely, muttering calculations, trying to anticipate glide path trajectories with the engines dead. The co-pilot held the yoke tightly, adjusting rudders, attempting to keep the plane level, but turbulence made the task nearly impossible. "Brace for minor turbulence," the captain warned. It wasn't minor. The plane dipped sharply and a collective gasp echoed through the cabin. Ethan gripped the armrest, his small knuckles white. He felt fear, yes, but also a strange clarity. He understood what was happening in a way most passengers could not. He could calculate speed, rate of descent, and approximate glide path in his head, a skill nurtured by countless hours of observation and study. Claire leaned over, whispering, "Ethan, I'm scared." "I know, Mom," Ethan said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "But we need to stay focused. They're trying to fix it." The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Outside, the clouds raced past the windows, blurring white and gray. The sun shone in patches, but the brightness did little to comfort anyone. Every movement of the plane, a sudden dip, a slight roll, sent waves of panic through passengers. Ethan noticed a subtle change in the aircraft's pitch, a slight banking to the left. He mentally calculated the shift, realizing that the glide might lead them off course if nothing changed. Captain Rodriguez attempted one last restart. A sputtering cough came from the engines, a fleeting hope, then silence again. The plane continued to descend, unpowered, moving faster with every passing second. Passengers prayed, held hands, whispered words of comfort, or stared blankly in disbelief. The stewardess near Ethan tried to maintain calm, but even she was shaken. Ethan's thoughts turned to his father. He remembered the stories of surviving unexpected situations, of maintaining composure in moments of crisis. And suddenly, a daring thought occurred to him. He could help. His father's old aviation radio, restored and tested countless times, could reach frequencies beyond the normal cockpit-to-ATC channels. Maybe, just maybe, he could make contact with someone who could assist, someone with experience, someone who could intercept and guide them. He whispered to himself, "I have to try, I can try." As the plane continued its descent, Ethan adjusted the radio, turned dials with precision, and found an old frequency his father had once used. He prepared to speak, knowing that one clear transmission might be the difference between life and death. Around him, chaos continued to build, the plane descending rapidly, the engines silent, the cabin tense with fear. For a moment he hesitated, the enormity of what he was about to do pressing down on him. Then he took a deep breath, steadied his hands, and pressed the microphone. "This is Bluebird Jr., flight in distress, engines out, descending rapidly." The words crackled through static, small but determined, carrying urgency and clarity. Somewhere above, someone was listening. Somewhere, a chain of events had begun that would change the fate of everyone aboard. Ethan had stepped from observer to participant, from fascinated child to crucial player in a high-altitude drama that would test courage, skill, and quick thinking. And for the first time since takeoff, there was a flicker of hope in the unending blue sky. The plane's descent was relentless. Every second, gravity pulled the massive fuselage downward, increasing the sense of urgency. Captain Rodriguez gripped the yoke with white-knuckled intensity, sweat streaming down his face. The cockpit, once a place of routine operations and calm, now felt like a pressure cooker. Alarms blared relentlessly, red lights pulsed in rapid succession, and the screens that usually offered a reassuring glow now flickered with warning symbols. The engines, stubbornly silent, mocked every attempt at revival. "Check auxiliary power," Rodriguez barked to his co-pilot, Lieutenant Mason, who immediately began toggling switches, scanning emergency checklists and monitoring instrument responses. The hum of the plane's electrical systems offered little comfort. The lights flickered, the radar intermittently froze, and the autopilot had disengaged entirely. Mason's face was pale, his jaw tight, but his training kept him moving methodically. "Still dead," Mason muttered, voice tense. "No response on either engine. Hydraulic levels holding, but we're losing altitude faster than projected." Rodriguez's mind raced. He had faced emergencies before, minor malfunctions, rapid decompressions, even engine failure simulations, but never a real dual-engine failure at 9,000 meters over remote terrain. All the calculations, the training, the years in the cockpit seemed simultaneously enough and insufficient. He was aware of one immutable truth. In this moment, every decision, every minor adjustment would determine whether the plane landed safely or not at all. "Altitude?" Rodriguez asked, eyes flicking over the altimeter. 8,700 meters and dropping," Mason replied, scanning the instruments. "Rate of descent increasing. Wind shear detected at our current trajectory. It's bad, Captain." Rodriguez exhaled, a forced breath to steady his nerves. He could feel the subtle tremor in the fuselage, the increasing downward pull. The plane was gliding, yes, but without engine power, its range and maneuverability were limited. Every glide angle miscalculated could send them off course, potentially into mountainous terrain. The realization pressed down on him. Time was not their ally. Attempting restart again, he said, toggling the ignition sequence for both engines. He followed the emergency protocol with military precision: fuel cutoff, battery check, ignition reset. Sparks flickered briefly on the screen, hope, but the engines remained lifeless. The red warning lights dominated the cockpit, a visual cacophony of failure. The communication system, too, was compromised. Calls to Denver Center were met with static. The ATC could only partially hear their distress, fragmented by interference. Every attempt to relay coordinates, altitude, and glide information was distorted, leaving the pilots isolated in their fight against gravity and failing machinery. Rodriguez gritted his teeth. He scanned the terrain maps on the navigation display. Mountains, rivers, and forests stretched below, beautiful in their vastness but unforgiving for a powerless aircraft. There were few options for emergency landing. Airports were distant, and no flat stretches large enough for a commercial airliner were immediately visible. The plane needed guidance. Precise, immediate guidance. He looked toward Mason. "We need eyes from above. Military, maybe. Someone who can intercept and guide us visually. Can you reach any channel beyond ATC?" Mason nodded, quickly adjusting frequencies, toggling the emergency transponder and scanning all possible communication bands. "Nothing. We're isolated, Captain. It's not coming through." Rodriguez's stomach sank. The weight of responsibility pressed on him like a physical force. 400 passengers and crew relied entirely on his judgment and experience. He could not afford panic. He could not afford mistakes. Every breath, every micro-adjustment of the yoke, every flick of the switch mattered. Meanwhile, Ethan, seated near the cockpit door, observed the frantic activity through the small window. He had never been closer to a real flight emergency, yet the lessons from years of watching his father's recordings gave him clarity. He understood exactly what the pilots were trying to do: the sequences, the protocols, the hope that an engine would sputter back to life. And then a bold thought struck him. He could help. He adjusted the dials on his portable aviation radio, fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He remembered his father's call sign, Bluebird, and a plan formed. If he could transmit a clear, precise signal, details of altitude, speed, and emergency status, he might reach someone capable of intervening, someone beyond the limits of the failing ATC. Claire, watching him, hesitated. "Ethan, are you sure?" she whispered, fear mingling with hope. Ethan nodded, determination etched on his young face. "I can do it, Mom, I have to." As he spoke into the radio, static crackled first, then a faint signal emerged. His voice, though small, carried exact details. "This is Bluebird Jr., engines out, descending rapidly, altitude 8,500 meters, heading 270, requesting immediate assistance." Back in the cockpit, Rodriguez and Mason paused as they noticed a small flicker on their backup monitors, an unknown frequency being received. "What is that?" Mason asked, confusion and curiosity mixing in his voice. Rodriguez leaned forward, listening intently. "Unknown signal, but it's coherent. It's a kid's voice." The sound crackled again, precise and calm despite the chaos. The boy's knowledge of aviation, the correct terminology, and the clear description of the plane's status made Rodriguez's chest tighten. He realized this wasn't a random transmission. It was accurate, detailed, and potentially crucial. "Keep monitoring that frequency," Rodriguez said, urgency in his tone. "This might be our lifeline." As the plane continued its rapid descent, the pilots alternated between controlling the glide path and interpreting the information coming from Ethan. Every micro-adjustment became a shared effort between the adults in the cockpit and the 14-year-old who had, through knowledge and courage, inserted himself into the chain of survival. The passengers, unaware of the boy's intervention, continued to experience escalating fear. The cabin rattled with turbulence, oxygen masks occasionally swung slightly, and murmurs of panic grew louder. Ethan remained focused, relaying information as calmly and clearly as possible. Each transmission connected a fatting thread of hope to the pilots who fought to keep the aircraft alive. Minutes stretched like hours. Rodriguez calculated glide ratios, attempted emergency maneuvers, and monitored rudimentary engine responses. He toggled switches to reroute auxiliary power, hopping for a spark of life from the turbines. The cockpit was a symphony of tension: alarms, dials, controls, static, and the persistent voice of the boy guiding them through each critical moment. Rodriguez's eyes swept the instruments again. "We're losing too much altitude. At this rate, we won't reach any major runway. We need visual confirmation of the terrain, or we need assistance from aircraft above us fast." Mason adjusted the transponder, attempting to flag any nearby military aircraft, but the signal was weak, intermittent. They were alone in the sky, a powerless airliner descending over rugged terrain, relying on intuition, skill, and now a small but incredibly sharp voice emanating from a boy just a few rows back. Ethan continued transmitting, relaying not only altitude and heading but also cabin observations, passenger reactions, seatbelt compliance, and turbulence effects. His detailed reporting, precise language, and calm demeanor provided Rodriguez with an almost impossible advantage, data he could trust when everything else seemed uncertain. For a brief moment, Rodriguez allowed himself to feel a spark of hope. A boy no older than 14 was connecting them to some unknown ally in the sky. That voice, measured and exact, was a lifeline. And as gravity continued to pull the aircraft downward, Rodriguez knew one truth: survival would require more than training. It would require trust, improvisation, and the courage of the unexpected. Above the clouds, unseen, someone had indeed picked up the faint transmission. The chain of events that would soon save hundreds of lives had begun. But for now, in the cockpit of Flight 482, Captain Rodriguez, his co-pilot, and a boy with a father's call sign were locked in a tense ballet, balancing machinery, human skill, and the fragile thread of hope that ran through the skis. Ethan's hands trembled slightly, but only from adrenaline. The plane continued its rapid descent, every shudder echoing through the cabin, every vibration amplifying the tension. The hum of the engines was gone, replaced by a low, haunting silence that made every passenger acutely aware of the gravity of the situation. Around him, people whispered, some weeping quietly, others gripping seats in fear. Flight attendants tried to calm them, their professional smiles strained and fleeting. Ethan's mind, however, was sharp. He had been preparing for this moment unknowingly for years. The aviation radio in his backpack, worn, patched, and polished to perfection, was now his lifeline. He had studied his father's manuals endlessly, memorized call signs, emergency protocols, and frequencies. And in this moment, knowledge became courage. "Mom," Ethan whispered, turning to Claire, who held his hand tightly. Her knuckles were white, eyes wide with panic. "I think I can reach someone. I have to try." Claire hesitated, fear battling trust. "Ethan, you're just a kid. What if it doesn't work?" "I have to try," he said firmly. "If no one hears the pilots, someone has to. I know what to do." The captain's voice boomed faintly over the intercom again, distorted but steady. "Remain calm. Follow instructions. Fasten seat belts. We're working to stabilize the plane." Ethan heard the urgency in Rodriguez's tone and knew that every second mattered. The pilots needed help, and ordinary channels weren't functioning. It was time for extraordinary measures. Ethan unpacked the radio, flicking switches with precision. He adjusted the frequency to an old channel his father had used, a high-altitude monitoring band often used for civil aviation emergencies and, occasionally, by military aircraft. He tapped the microphone, hesitating only a fraction of a second before speaking. "This is Bluebird Jr.," he said clearly, using his father's call sign. Flight 482, engines out, descending rapidly at 9,000 meters, heading approximately 270, requesting immediate assistance. Passengers aboard, cabin crew responding, glide path unstable. Repeat, requesting immediate assistance. The static crackled, then paused. The voice was small, just a child, but it was deliberate, precise, and carried exact technical information. Ethan's heart pounded. Had anyone heard him? Was his effort wasted in the void of the sky? In the cockpit, Captain Rodriguez leaned forward, suddenly alert. "Mason, did you hear that? On the emergency frequency." Mason's eyes widened as he listened to the faint but coherent transmission coming from somewhere within the cabin. "It's a child's voice," Mason said, disbelief mixing with hope. "He's reporting our altitude, heading, it's accurate." Rodriguez swallowed, realizing the potential. The boy had given them real-time data when their primary communication channels had failed. "Get a visual of the source. We may be able to coordinate through him if the radio fails again," Rodriguez said. Ethan, unaware of the immediate cockpit attention, continued speaking. "Engines non-functional, rate of descent increasing, altitude 8,500 meters, cabin crew assisting passengers, oxygen masks deployed but turbulence strong, position relative to last ATC fix, 45 kilometers west of Denver Center." The boy's voice, steady despite fear, carried the precision of a seasoned observer. His words were fragments of data, but for Rodriguez, each fragment was a lifeline. He realized that with Ethan's guidance, he could adapt the glide path, anticipate shifts, and even communicate back, in case the primary radios failed entirely. Meanwhile, in the cabin, passengers began noticing the boy's unusual activity. Some whispered to each other, eyes wide. "He's talking into some radio," a mother said. Ethan's calmness in the middle of chaos inspired a strange sense of reassurance. Even panic, they noticed, seemed to recede slightly when he spoke. Claire gripped his hand, whispering, "Ethan, just stay calm, okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," Ethan said, focusing intently on the dials and knobs. He adjusted the radio again, fine-tuning the frequency. His call sign, Bluebird Jr., wasn't just symbolic, it carried purpose, history, and precision. His father's legacy guided him now, giving him confidence when everyone else feared the worst. Somewhere above the clouds, hundreds of kilometers away, two F-22 Raptors were conducting a routine training sortie. The pilots, call signs Falcon 1 and Falcon 2, were practicing formation maneuvers when their communication monitoring system detected a faint, unusual signal. At first, they dismissed it as background chatter. Then the details caught their attention. "Falcon 1, did you hear that?" Falcon 2 said, squinting at his controls. "It's some kind of distress call, and it's a child." The Raptors intercepted the signal, static-laden but precise. "Engines out, descending rapidly, 9,000 meters, heading 270, the boy's voice repeated. The information matched a missing transponder reading that NORAD had flagged moments earlier. "Coordinates match our radar reports," Falcon 1 said, eyes narrowing. "This isn't a prank, someone in real trouble." In the airliner, Ethan continued, unaware that military jets were already redirecting to intercept. He spoke confidently, reporting altitude fluctuations, turbulence effects, and even small cabin details. His words provided a bridge between the powerless pilots and the outside world, connecting them to eyes that could guide them from above. Rodriguez realized that the boy's call could be their only reliable lifeline. "Mason," he said, "listen carefully. Keep monitoring him. Coordinate any adjustments through him if necessary. He may be the only channel we can trust right now." Ethan's radio crackled again, this time with the faint response of an unknown receiver. He froze, heart hammering. Someone had heard him. The voice on the other end was calm, authoritative, military. "Bluebird Jr., this is Falcon 1. We read you. Stay on channel. We are en route to your location." Ethan's pulse quickened. You're coming, he asked, disbelief and relief mingling in his voice. Affirmative, we're intercepting the aircraft. Maintain calm. Relay information to the cockpit. We'll guide you visually. The cockpit erupted in astonishment. Rodriguez stared at Mason, then at the static-laden feed coming from Ethan. By God, he just reached F-22s. A child, a boy, may have saved us all already. Ethan, still in his seat, couldn't fully comprehend what had just happened. He had expected maybe a distant reply from some civilian channel, not highly trained Air Force pilots ready to intercept. But training, preparation, and his father's lessons had led him here. His calm, precise transmissions had made the difference. The passengers, still unaware of the outside connection, experienced a strange sense of hope. Somehow, despite the panic, the boy's bravery inspired calm. He continued relaying information, now with direct guidance from Falcon 1. Engine status, glide path, speed adjustments, even minor turbulence readings. Outside, the two Raptors streaked through the sky, cutting through cloud layers at incredible speed, guided by Ethan's voice. Every second mattered. Every adjustment was critical. And in the airliner, a 14-year-old boy had become the linchpin in a high-altitude drama that would soon define survival against impossible odds. The first crackle of hope had arrived. The boy's call sign, Bluebird Jr., carried with it courage, precision, and a bridge between ordinary humans and extraordinary technology. The plane was not yet safe. The engines were still silent, but the trajectory of survival had shifted. For Ethan, for the pilots, for the passengers, and even for the unseen F-22 pilots racing toward them, the impossible was beginning to feel achievable. And in that tense, suspended moment, the sky seemed to hold its breath. Falcon 1 and Falcon 2 sliced through the clouds, engines roaring, their Raptors performing precise maneuvers with the skill honed over years of rigorous training. The sky, endless and deceptively serene, suddenly felt alive with tension. A faint but urgent transmission had caught their attention, a child's voice crackling through the airwaves, reporting a commercial aircraft in critical distress. Falcon 1, are you seeing this? Falcon 2 asked, eyes darting to the radar screens. Affirmative, replied Falcon 1, gripping the throttle. Flight 482, dual engine failure. Altitude 9,000 meters and descending. The coordinates match a missing transponder report we just got from NORAD. A chill ran down both pilots' spines. They had trained for emergencies, simulated almost every conceivable scenario, but a dual-engine loss at high altitude in a civilian airliner, far from the nearest airport, was a nightmare in real life. And now, a child's voice was acting as their primary source of real-time data. Bluebird Jr., Falcon 1 muttered, repeating the call sign. Is a kid, is this for real? Falcon 2 nodded, incredulous but focused. It has to be. The transmission is accurate. Altitude, heading, cabin conditions, all correct. Whoever this is, they're relaying every detail perfectly. For a split second, the vastness of the sky, the roaring wind, and the enormity of responsibility threatened to overwhelm them. But both pilots pushed the doubt aside. There was work to do. Hundreds of lives hung in the balance, and they had guidance from a 14-year-old boy whose calm precision was now their lifeline. The Raptors adjusted their course, accelerating toward the coordinates Ethan had provided. At supersonic speed, the clouds blurred past, condensing into streaks of white and gray, yet the pilots maintained formation, scanning constantly for the distressed airliner. Radar confirmed a large blip descending rapidly, engines dead. They calculated that, if left unassisted, the plane would not make it to a runway in time. They would have to intercept visually and provide guidance for a safe glide path. Falcon 1 to Bluebird Jr., Falcon 1 spoke into the secure channel, voice calm and authoritative. We read you. Maintain this channel. Help us guide the pilots. You're our eyes on the cockpit instruments. Ethan's hands tightened around the radio. Yes, I can do that, he replied, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. The realization that trained Air Force pilots were now responding sent a surge of both relief and adrenaline through him. In the cockpit of Flight 482, Captain Rodriguez and Mason listened intently to the strange but reassuring voice relayed through Ethan. "Did he just reach F-22s?" Mason asked, disbelief etched across his face. Rodriguez's jaw tightened. "Yes, and they're coming fast. This boy just became our lifeline. Every instruction, every adjustment, we follow him." Ethan relayed updates with precision, providing altitude, descent rate, and turbulence data, while the F-22 pilots coordinated their approach. The jet pilots, highly trained in visual interception, communicated through the child's radio when the main cockpit channels failed, their calm professionalism guiding Rodriguez's every decision. Outside the cabin, passengers remained unaware of the extraordinary coordination unfolding above them. They felt turbulence, feared the descent, and whispered prayers. But Ethan, in his seat near the cockpit, became the bridge between panic and salvation. His clear voice relayed instructions, translating military precision into practical guidance that the commercial crew could follow in real time. Falcon 1 led the intercept, adjusting altitude and position. "We're approximately 5 kilometers out, above and slightly to the left of your aircraft," the pilot transmitted. "Maintain glide path as described. Bluebird Jr., relay all further instructions to the cockpit." Ethan repeated the instructions for Captain Rodriguez. "Adjust yoke slightly right, decrease descent angle by 2 degrees, maintain airspeed at 250 knots. Rodriguez followed the guidance with meticulous care. Every adjustment mattered. A single error could send the plane off course into forests or mountainous terrain. He glanced at Mason, who nodded in agreement. The cabin continued to shudder as turbulence picked up, but the pilots felt a rare sense of control, anchored by the clear, precise directions from the child. "Passengers, please remain seated," Rodriguez announced over the intercom. "We are receiving assistance and are stabilizing the glide path." Ethan's confidence grew with each transmission. He relayed instrument readings, cabin conditions, and even small details. Passengers secured, turbulence at moderate level, no oxygen depletion. Each report helped the F-22 pilots and cockpit crew make critical decisions under immense pressure. High above, Falcon 2 scanned the descending plane. "Altitude dropping faster than expected," the pilot muttered. "We need to keep them aligned for visual reference and make sure the glide path is stable. Bluebird Jr., are you receiving our instructions clearly?" "Yes, I'm relaying it to the cockpit now," Ethan responded, his young voice carrying authority beyond his years. The coordination was seamless, a complex dance between human skill, childlike bravery, and cutting-edge technology. The Raptors began flanking the airliner, maintaining a position slightly ahead and above, their sleek forms cutting through clouds. They acted as both guides and shields, providing visual cues for the pilots, monitoring wind currents and calculating minor corrections to the glide trajectory. Back in the cockpit, Rodriguez followed Ethan's instructions, carefully adjusting pitch, yaw, and throttle settings for the engines that remained idle. Mason monitored the instruments, cross-referencing each adjustment with the data relayed by the boy. The plane, massive and unwieldy without engine power, began to respond predictably, its descent now slightly stabilized. Outside, the pilots of Falcon 1 and Falcon 2 communicated silently, coordinating their speed and position with near-perfect precision. They were aware that Flight 482's fragile glide path depended on their guidance and the accuracy of Ethan's relay. Every maneuver was calculated to the second. Every adjustment could mean the difference between disaster and survival. Ethan, sensing the critical importance of his role, remained calm, focused, and unwavering. He relayed, "Adjust heading by 5 degrees left to counter wind shear. Rate of descent now 1,200 meters per minute. Cabin turbulence decreasing slightly." Rodriguez executed each adjustment with care, his trust in Ethan growing with every instruction. For the first time since the engines failed, there was a tangible sense of control in the cockpit. The passengers, unaware of the high-stakes orchestration above, began to sense the subtle reduction in turbulence, the smoother glide, and the decreasing panic among the crew. The minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an hour, but the coordination between a child, the commercial pilots, and the F-22 pilots worked seamlessly. It was a collaboration born of necessity, courage, and quick thinking. The impossible was starting to feel achievable. Falcon 1's pilot spoke again, voice calm but urgent. Bluebird Jr. maintained communication. Provide continuous updates on altitude, cabin status, and instrument readings. We're guiding you to the nearest suitable emergency landing site. Keep the crew informed and steady. Ethan nodded, hands steady, voice unwavering. Copy that. Relay instructions to the cockpit. Glide path stable, cabin calm, passengers secured. Rate of descent slightly improving. As the Raptors continued their intercept, they calculated the optimal approach for the airliner, accounting for wind currents, altitude, and the glide ratio. Rodriguez and Mason followed Ethan's guidance meticulously, trusting the boy's observations as if he were a seasoned flight officer. For the first time since takeoff, the cockpit felt a glimmer of hope. The engines were still dead, but the plane was no longer a helpless glider. With Ethan's call sign reaching two highly trained F-22 pilots and their expertise translating into real-time guidance, the odds of survival had shifted dramatically. And high above, the sky vast, beautiful, and merciless, witnessed the extraordinary collaboration between a boy, commercial pilots, and the most advanced fighter jets in the world. The descent of Flight 482 was no longer a passive fall. It had become a meticulously guided journey toward survival, and the world below remained oblivious to the courage and skill saving them all. Above the swirling clouds, the two F-22 Raptors sliced through the sky like silver arrows, cutting against gusting winds at incredible speed. Falcon 1 led the formation, Falcon 2 flanking in perfect symmetry, their sleek silhouettes stark against the brilliant white of the clouds below. Every instrument panel, every gauge, every control was under constant scrutiny. Above them, a massive commercial airliner, Flight 482, descended helplessly, engines dead, its glide path dictated by a 14-year-old boy. Ethan gripped his father's radio, eyes wide but hands steady. His heart thudded with a mix of fear and purpose. Through him, the pilots in the cockpit were receiving guidance that would determine life or death. He relayed altitude, descent rate, heading, and even minor cabin observations, transmitting clearly, deliberately, and calmly. Bluebird Jr. maintained glide path heading 275, Falcon 1 instructed, voice authoritative yet reassuring. Reduce rate of descent to 1,100 meters per minute. Adjust flaps slightly to compensate for turbulence. Ethan relayed every word to Captain Rodriguez. Glide path heading 275, rate of descent to 1,100. Adjust flaps slightly, he repeated. The pilots executed the commands with precision, the massive plane responding slowly but predictably. It was a delicate dance. The airliner was unpowered, heavy, and vulnerable. Every adjustment had to be calculated to the centimeter. In the cockpit, tension was palpable. Rodriguez and Mason had one eye on the instruments, one on the sky through the windshield and one on Ethan's transmission, the boy's voice a beacon of clarity amid chaos. "He's incredible," Mason whispered, almost in awe. "How is a 14-year-old keeping us alive?" Rodriguez didn't answer. There was no time for words. Every second counted. The Raptor pilots, trained for dogfights and high-speed maneuvers, were now performing a mission unlike any they had faced in years of service. Guiding a powerless commercial airliner with hundreds of lives aboard, relying on a child's precision and courage. Falcon 2 adjusted altitude. sliding slightly below the airliner to provide a visual reference for the glide path. Bluebird Jr., relay to cockpit. Maintain slight left bank to align with runway trajectory. Will continue guiding your approach visually. Ethan repeated the instructions, keeping his voice steady despite the pressure. Maintain slight left bank, align with runway trajectory, he said. He noticed passengers craning their necks at the clouds outside, unaware of the deadly ballet unfolding above them. Their fate now hinged on a collaboration of skill, bravery, and quick thinking that transcended age, training, and circumstance. The Raptors communicated constantly, adjusting for wind shear, turbulence, and atmospheric pressure. Every micro-adjustment was critical. The commercial plane, though massive and unwieldy without engine power, began to respond to the calculated corrections. The descent rate stabilized, the glide path became more predictable, and for the first time since the engine failure, there was a tangible sense of hope in the cockpit. Ethan, realizing the importance of his observations, monitored the cabin through the small gap in his seat. Passengers secured, turbulence moderate but decreasing, he reported. Cabin crew assisting, oxygen masks functioning properly. Every detail mattered. Even minor changes in passenger behavior or turbulence could affect the plane's center of gravity, and the Raptor's guidance depended on accurate information. Falcon 1 scanned the horizon. Runway identified. Emergency airstrip clear. Bluebird Jr. relay instructions to ensure pilots maintain correct approach vector and descent rate. Ethan's hands tightened on the radio. Cockpit runway ahead. Maintain heading, align with strip, descent rate steady at 1,100 meters per minute. Falcons confirming alignment. Rodriguez followed every command meticulously. He adjusted the yoke, flaps, and rudder to match the instructions. Mason monitored the instruments and relayed minor adjustments back to Ethan, who then transmitted them to the F-22 pilots. The plane responded slowly but predictably, a massive, unwieldy machine now guided by a perfect combination of human skill, military precision, and youthful courage. The Raptors maintained their positions, flanking the airliner to provide constant visual reference points. Falcon 2 moved slightly ahead and above, marking the trajectory, while Falcon 1 matched the plane's speed, making real-time adjustments to ensure the glide path remained safe. Every movement was choreographed, every maneuver calculated to the second. Ethan, aware of the immense responsibility on his shoulders, remained remarkably composed. Glide path stable, heading 280, rate of descent holding, turbulence minor, slight crosswind from left, he reported. His calmness inspired confidence in the cockpit. Even the crew, who had been tense and fearful moments ago, began to trust the instructions emanating from a 14-year-old boy. The passengers, still unaware of the military coordination overhead, began to notice subtle changes. The plane no longer dipped suddenly. Turbulence, though present, felt manageable. The oxygen masks hung in place, the stewardesses moved efficiently, and a sense of cautious optimism began to replace outright panic. Falcon 1 radioed again. Bluebird Jr. coordinate cockpit adjustments. Maintain glide path, monitor descent rate, ensure alignment with runway. You're doing well. Keep reporting cabin conditions. Ethan relayed everything precisely. Cockpit, maintain glide path, descent steady, adjust heading slightly left for wind correction. Passengers calm, turbulence decreasing. Falcons providing visual guidance. Rodriguez followed the commands carefully, feeling an unfamiliar but reassuring confidence in the boy's observations. Mason, watching the instruments, nodded approvingly. The plane's response was improving steadily. Though unpowered, Flight 482 had begun to behave predictably. Minutes dragged like hours, the massive airliner descending slowly, guided with precision by the combination of Ethan's observations and the Raptor's maneuvering. The airstrip in the distance grew larger, a faint ribbon of hope cutting through the vast green of the Washington forests. Falcon 2 moved into position slightly above the runway's projected alignment, providing a direct visual reference for Rodriguez. Bluebird Jr. Ensure the cockpit maintains a level glide and adjusts flaps for landing approach, the pilot instructed. Ethan transmitted the instructions without hesitation. Cockpit level glide, adjust flaps for landing. Runway alignment confirmed. Falcon's guiding approach. The pilots executed every adjustment with painstaking care. The plane's massive body, heavy and unpowered, began to respond predictably, the descent rate steady, and the glide path perfectly aligned with the emergency strip. For the first time, survival didn't feel like a hope, it felt achievable. Outside the plane, the F-22s maintained their positions, wings cutting the clouds, engines roaring, scanning for any environmental hazard. Their mission, a complex aerial rescue guided by a boy's voice, was a testament to skill, courage, and improvisation under pressure. Ethan, still in his seat, felt a strange calm amidst the chaos. His observations, his voice, his father's call sign, they were all contributing to a solution that no one had imagined possible. High above, in the clouds and sky, human ingenuity and youthful courage had merged into a single lifeline. Falcon 1's pilot confirmed, Bluebird Jr., you've stabilized their descent. Maintain communications. Emergency teams will be ready on the ground. Ethan's heart swelled. Copy that, relaying to cockpit. He glanced at his mother. Mom, we're going to make it, he whispered. Rodriguez and Mason, cockpit hands trembling slightly, exchanged a rare smile. For the first time since engine failure, there was a tangible sense of control. And all of it, the stabilized glide, the visual guidance, the coordination, was facilitated by a boy whose courage had bridged the impossible gap between a powerless commercial airliner and the most advanced fighter jets in the sky. High above, the wind roared past the Raptors. Below, Flight 482 glided gracefully, stabilized for the first time in minutes, its fate now hanging in a careful balance. And Ethan, still clutching the radio, had become the most important person in the sky. The airstrip appeared below, a narrow ribbon of asphalt nestled in the lush Washington forest, glinting faintly under the mid-afternoon sun. From the cockpit of Flight 482, it looked impossibly small, almost surreal, given the size of the powerless aircraft hurtling toward it. Captain Rodriguez gritted his teeth, hands steady but tense, glancing repeatedly at Mason, who monitored instruments with an intensity bordering on panic. Every reading mattered. Every micro-adjustment could decide life or death. Ethan, seated just a few rows back, gripped the aviation radio like a lifeline. His knuckles were white, heart hammering, but his mind was sharp, cataloging altitude, glide path, and descent rate. His eyes flicked between the horizon and the cabin, relaying every observation to the cockpit and the F-22 pilots. Glide path steady, 800 meters altitude, 900 meters per minute descent, turbulence minimal, he reported calmly. Falcon 1 and Falcon 2 flanked the airliner with precise coordination, their sleek bodies slicing through the sky, providing real-time visual cues. Every adjustment of the Raptor's speed, angle, and altitude was calculated to perfection. The pilots spoke sparingly but authoritatively through the radio, directing Ethan's relay of instructions to the cockpit. Bluebird Jr., keep reporting all cabin and instrument readings, Falcon 1 instructed. The approach is tight. Every second counts. Maintain communication. Yes, copy, Ethan replied, voice unwavering. He knew hundreds of lives relied on his precision. Passengers secured, cabin calm. Flight instruments stable. Glide path aligned with emergency strip. In the cockpit, Rodriguez and Mason adjusted flaps, ailerons, and rudder carefully. The engines were still silent, but the plane's momentum and glide angle now allowed them to approach the emergency strip with controlled precision. Rodriguez's voice over the intercom was calm, almost soothing. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are approaching an emergency landing. You are in capable hands. In the cabin, Passengers clutched armrests and prayed quietly. Fear still lingered, but the steadiness of the pilots and the boy's confident voice over the radio gave them a fragile sense of hope. Some glanced at Ethan, realizing the extraordinary courage of the child orchestrating their survival from the back of the plane. Claire squeezed her son's hand tightly. "You're amazing, Ethan," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. The descent became sharper. The airstrip grew larger in view, but so did the pressure. The plane had to touch down perfectly. Too steep and the landing could be catastrophic, too shallow and there wouldn't be enough runway to stop. Falcon 1's jet adjusted slightly, moving above and to the side, providing a precise visual reference. Bluebird Jr. relay. Maintain glide path at 7 degrees, reduce descent rate slightly, align perfectly with runway centerline, the pilot instructed. Ethan repeated the instructions to Rodriguez. Glide path 7 degrees, reduce descent slightly, align with runway centerline, Falcons guiding visually. The pilots complied, hands shaking slightly but focus absolute. The plane's massive body tilted gently, then corrected as per the guidance. The slope was steep, the approach long, but every adjustment counted. Outside the windows, passengers saw the runway widening, the green forest giving way to asphalt, but still had little idea of how narrowly their lives depended on a boy's observations and the pilot's precision. Suddenly, a gust of wind hit from the left, causing a minor roll. The airliner shuddered violently, passengers gripping armrests tightly. Rodriguez's hands moved instantly, adjusting ailerons and rudder, while Mason monitored airspeed and altitude. Bluebird Jr. relay immediate adjustment. Minor left correction, flaps full for final landing, Falcon 1 instructed. Ethan transmitted quickly. Cockpit minor left correction, flaps full, maintain heading. The adjustments were executed seamlessly, stabilizing the descent once more. The runway grew ever closer, the tension in the cabin mounting with each second. Rodriguez inhaled deeply, focusing entirely on the instruments and the horizon. He relied on the F-22s and Ethan's voice more than ever now. The glide path was narrow, the margin for error non-existent, but the synchronization between the Raptors, the boy, and the cockpit had created a fragile but workable path to safety. The landing gear extended with a low mechanical hum, a sound that offered a fleeting sense of reassurance. Ethan's voice remained calm, providing continuous data. Altitude 200 meters, descent rate 500 meters per minute, runway centerline aligned, turbulence minor. Passengers could now see the runway clearly through the windows. Some whispered prayers, some held hands, some stared in disbelief at the miraculous coordination that was guiding them safely to the ground. Claire hugged Ethan tightly, whispering, "You've done it. You're saving everyone." The airliner touched down with a low, controlled thud, the wheels screeching against the asphalt as friction slowed the massive aircraft. Sparks flew briefly from the tires, but the plane remained upright, gliding perfectly along the runway. Rodriguez's hands trembled slightly as he guided the plane through the final stretch. Mason monitored speed and brake deployment, ensuring nothing went wrong in the final moments. Ethan's voice, steady until the last moment, reported every micro-adjustment. Speed decreasing, glide path stable, runway ahead clear. Passengers remained secured. The Raptors flanked the airliner until it slowed to a near stop, then climbed back into the clouds, leaving the airstrip silent but safe. Falcon 1 transmitted one final message to Ethan. "Bluebird Jr., excellent work. You've guided Flight 482 safely. We'll ensure emergency crews are on standby." Ethan exhaled, relief flooding through him. The plane was still massive, still heavy, but it was on solid ground. Passengers erupted in cheers and applause, tears streaming down many faces. Crew members hugged, shaken but alive. Ethan looked around, seeing the gratitude and astonishment in every eye. He had become the unlikely hero, a bridge between chaos and survival. Captain Rodriguez unclasped his hands from the yoke, voice trembling slightly as he addressed the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the crew, thank you for your courage and patience. Special thanks to a young boy who provided invaluable guidance." Ethan's mother sobbed quietly, proud and overwhelmed. Ethan, exhausted but exhilarated, smiled faintly. He realized that every hour of study, every repaired radio, every fascination with flight had led to this moment. He had turned knowledge into action and bravery into results. Outside, emergency crews arrived, tending to passengers, checking systems, and securing the runway. The airstrip, once just a strip of asphalt in a forest, had become a lifeline thanks to the improbable collaboration of child, pilots, and military intervention. The F-22s disappeared into the sky, leaving Ethan and the passengers with an unforgettable memory. The miracle of survival at 9,000 meters, orchestrated in part by a 14-year-old boy whose calm voice had guided professionals through an impossible crisis. In the cabin, passengers hugged, some crying, some laughing in disbelief. Crew members patted Ethan on the shoulder, calling him a hero. Even Rodriguez and Mason exchanged a glance of awe, realizing the boy's actions had saved hundreds of lives. Ethan, finally relaxing for the first time in hours, looked out the window at the forested landscape around them. He felt a strange mix of exhaustion, pride, and disbelief. The sky, which had been a battlefield, now seemed serene again. The impossible had been achieved. And somewhere high above, the Raptors returned to base, their pilots reflecting on the unusual but heroic role of Bluebird Jr., the child who had guided a powerless airliner to safety. The story of bravery, skill, and improbable heroism would be told for years to come. The emergency crews swarmed the runway, a well-coordinated force of firefighters, paramedics, and airline personnel. They moved with practiced efficiency, yet the magnitude of the rescue did not go unnoticed. Passengers were guided off the plane, some supported physically, others trembling with relief. The massive aircraft, now stationary, looked innocuous against the sunlit tarmac, but everyone knew how close it had come to disaster. Ethan stepped down from his seat, still clutching the portable radio. His mother, Claire, pulled him into a tight hug, sobbing tears of relief. "Ethan, you saved us. You saved everyone," she whispered, voice choked with emotion. Ethan felt a strange mixture of pride and exhaustion. The hours of fear, adrenaline, and responsibility had drained him physically, but the knowledge of what he had accomplished gave him an energy that no fatigue could diminish. Captain Rodriguez and Mason emerged from the cockpit, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion, disbelief, and awe. Rodriguez bent slightly to shake Ethan's hand, his face lined with both relief and respect. "Son," he said softly, "you guided us when no one else could. Your calm, your knowledge, it saved hundreds of lives today. You are a hero." Ethan blushed, overwhelmed by the attention. He had been nervous throughout the ordeal, unsure whether a 14-year-old could truly influence the outcome. Yet standing here, in the presence of professional pilots, emergency crews, and grateful passengers, he realized the truth. Courage and knowledge combined could overcome even the most impossible odds. The media arrived almost immediately. Helicopters hovered overhead, reporters gathered cameras, and flashing lights reflected off the aircraft. Questions flew. How did a child manage to relay accurate technical details? How did the Air Force intercept so quickly? How did the pilots maintain composure under extreme pressure? Ethan, surrounded by reporters, spoke simply, humbly, yet with clarity. "I just did what I could," he said softly. "I relayed what I observed and what I knew. The pilots and F-22 crews were incredible. They guided the plane. I just tried to help." Rodriguez and Mason added their testimony, praising the boy's role repeatedly. Without Ethan's observations, precise communication, and calm demeanor, Rodriguez said, voice steady, the outcome could have been catastrophic. His actions were extraordinary. The Air Force issued a statement praising the response of Falcon 1 and Falcon 2, but also noting the unusual and critical role of Bluebird Jr. in relaying accurate information. It was unprecedented. A civilian child, operating a personal aviation radio under extreme conditions, coordinating directly with both commercial pilots and military aircraft to save lives. Passengers were escorted into waiting buses, many calling loved ones immediately. Tears, hugs, and whispered prayers filled the air. Some stared at Ethan, eyes wide, realizing the magnitude of what had just occurred. "That boy, he saved us all," one woman murmured, her voice shaking with emotion. Emergency medical teams checked for minor injuries, bruises from turbulence, light contusions, and shock, but remarkably, no major injuries had been reported. The landing, guided by the precise instructions from Ethan and the F-22 pilots, had been perfect under the circumstances. Relief washed over the airstrip, a collective exhale after hours of tension. Authorities arrived to debrief the crew and passengers. Aviation regulators, Air Force representatives, and airline officials wanted to understand every detail. How had the boy managed to coordinate effectively? How had the pilots adjusted to his instructions? How had the Raptors intercepted with precision? Ethan answered questions simply, humbly, and honestly, never exaggerating his role, yet never downplaying the importance of his contributions. As the day wore on, social media erupted with stories of the miracle flight. Images of Flight 482 safely on the tarmac circulated worldwide, paired with reports of a 14-year-old boy whose call sign, Bluebird Jr., had become legendary. News outlets highlighted the incredible chain of events: the dual-engine failure, the rapid descent, the F-22 interception, and the boy's critical role in relaying information. Ethan became a symbol of courage and intelligence, demonstrating that age and size did not define capability. Adults praised him, peers admired him, and the aviation community hailed him as an inspiration. Awards were discussed, citations of bravery, certificates of recognition, and even special invitations to aviation academies. Yet Ethan remained humble. He insisted he had only done what he thought necessary. Rodriguez and Mason continued to be interviewed together, always emphasizing Ethan's contributions. "It's hard to overstate his impact," Mason said. "The boy remained calm, precise, and entirely reliable. Under pressure, many adults would have faltered. He didn't." The story reached the Pentagon. Officials noted the unusual circumstances: a civilian child effectively directing military aircraft in coordination with commercial pilots. It sparked discussions on emergency protocols, rapid response communications, and even the role of citizen observers in crises. Ethan's calm voice and quick thinking became a case study in aviation circles, emphasizing the importance of knowledge, observation, and courage under pressure. Back at the airstrip, Ethan and his mother watched as Flight 482 was secured, passengers assisted, and emergency crews conducted their final checks. The air was filled with a sense of relief, joy, and disbelief at what had just transpired. For Ethan, it was a moment of reflection. He had faced fear, responsibility, and danger far beyond his years, yet he had acted decisively, effectively, and bravely. Authorities arranged a formal recognition ceremony. Ethan, standing on the tarmac before an audience of officials, pilots, and survivors, received a certificate of valor from the airline and a personal commendation from the Air Force. Falcon 1 and Falcon 2 pilots shook his hand, praising his courage and precision. "You guided us through the impossible," Falcon 1 said. "Your calm, knowledge, and quick thinking saved lives today." Ethan accepted the accolades quietly, feeling proud yet humble. He knew that the true heroes were the crew and military pilots as well, and he never took credit for their skill. But for the first time, he understood the extraordinary impact of preparation, observation, and courage. News outlets interviewed passengers, many recounting the miraculous coordination that saved them. "It was like watching a miracle unfold in real time," one passenger said. "A child, pilots, and F-22s all working together. I've never seen anything like it in my life." The story became global, inspiring young people and adults alike. Ethan's actions demonstrated that even in the most dire circumstances, intelligence, composure, and courage could change the outcome. His calm voice, accurate observations, and unwavering determination had bridged gaps between civilians, professionals, and military technology, saving hundreds of lives. As evening descended, Flight 482 was cleared for final checks, and passengers were allowed to leave the airstrip safely. Ethan and his mother watched as the airliner, once helpless in the sky, stood secure, a testament to bravery, skill, and the improbable courage of a boy who refused to remain a bystander. In the years that followed, Ethan's story became legendary in aviation circles, inspiring training programs and highlighting the importance of observation, knowledge, and courage in emergencies. He remained humble, a quiet hero who had turned fear into action, chaos into order, and uncertainty into survival. And somewhere high above, in the skies where he had once sent his call, the memory of Bluebird Jr., the child who guided the powerless plane to safety, remained a symbol of courage, intelligence, and hope for generations to come.